90% of consumers read online reviews before visiting a business. What do people see when they look you up online? We give you the tools you need to take control of your reputation. Send surveys to your customers via text message with Testimonial Collector. Get 5-star reviews on all the major platforms like Google, Yelp, and more. Track what people are saying about your business with Reputation Manager. Respond to comments and turn negative reviews into happy customers. See what your competitors' customers are saying about them with Competition Tracker. Learn great marketing tactics and what it takes to stay on top. A bigger social presence means more connections. Automatically generate and schedule engaging social media posts with Social 365. Build trust, boost sales, and grow your business.
Hey, hi everybody, and welcome back to another Thursday of the Entrepreneur Life Show, and I am your host, Rose, founder of McDonald Bookkeeping Services, and I bring you great guests that help you in your day-to-day business and or your lives where you can really connect with them, and maybe they have made such a great success of their business and their career choice, and maybe you want to follow that journey and learn more. So let's first start off by thanking all of my faithful listeners on whatever platform you are watching on. If you are on YouTube, make sure you check out the Super Chat and you can jump in. You might have a few questions you want to ask the guest. Feel free. If you are on social media, Facebook or Instagram, of course, you can jump in and ask any questions, or if you have any comments, check out our guest. Everything there is to learn about how amazing they are. If you have been following, I've been fortunate to have some of the best guests, some of the greatest celebrity guests and business venture entrepreneurs out there. I want to, of course, thank my sponsor, which is Sean Maddox, Marketing Out the Box. So if you want to get your engagement up, more visibility, be sure to check out Sean at Marketing Out the Box. So let's see, who is our guest today? So, I'm excited because, as I said, I do listen to my viewers and my listeners. And some people are in a time where, they want to take a career change, a pivot, or maybe there's something that they are interested in me having a certain guest on the show. And as many of you know, I've had some people ask about different reality show guests. And so I have had a few reality celebrities on the show, as well as I've had a producer. But now, let me tell you, this one I'm loving, because if you don't know about what he has done, then you're not from this planet, basically. So my guest today is 2-time Emmy winner, David Page, who has really changed the game in food television. From what we used to see, you just see people kind of cooking, and showing you kind of make their meals and, your chefs, and then they give you these tricks and stuff, and you can see them, being very creative with food. But who doesn't love Diners, Dives, and Drive-In? Okay, who doesn't? Because let me tell you, this show, what it does is, if you are traveling, you're anybody like me, this show told you where to go for good food, and it was entertaining. But now we have the creator, the producer, the one who came up with the concept, the idea, and we're going to learn everything about David Page. So let's get him on the show and get it started. Hi there. How are you?
I'm great. Hi, Rose. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for accepting my invitation. I am truly at a joy to have you on. Because, reading your bio and understanding you have had your foot in some of the greatest shows when it comes to food TV, Food America, and that a lot of people may not even know like how it got developed. You know, and if you don't mind, if you kind of take my listeners on a little journey of, you know, how you ended up getting into your career choice, your journey of maybe your schooling, education, and why food?
Well, food ended up as an accidental choice, but I got into the business of journalism, the business of broadcast journalism first, back when I was in high school. I had a desire to be on the radio. And in those days, a 16-year-old kid with a third-class broadcast license could get a weekend or nighttime job at the little local radio station, which is what I did. And on the weekend, my parents would have to drive me to work and come pick me up because I didn't have a license. But from that start, I ended up following first an education and then a career around the country. I kind of gave up on the education part of the way through as I moved from radio station to television station. And as I told my daughter, it is not something I recommend or suggest. But I ended up following jobs from the Midwest through being an investigative reporter in local markets, Houston, Atlanta, Phoenix. Finally, I got picked up by NBC as a producer out of the Chicago bureau. 2 years later, they sent me to Europe, first to London, then to Frankfurt, then to Budapest. And out of that posting, I covered stories in Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And the first inklings of my interest in food journalism started then, as I noticed that food in each different country or each different part of a country, because food is so regional, was a gateway into the society I was at that moment immersed in. It became a deep interest of mine. It stayed with me when I came back to the States. I remained in network news. I was senior producer of Good Morning America, senior investigative producer of 2020. But when I finally went out on my own with this interest in food, I got very lucky. I called Al Roker, who had worked for me when I was co-producer of the weekend editions of the Today Show. That was before Al was on the main show. And he had a production company, and I said, hey, I need some work. And he said, well, I'm doing some stuff for the Food Network. You want to do some of that? So I started doing food television simply because I needed a job. And that relationship with the Food Network grew. At one point, I was pitching programs to them with no success whatsoever. The same very kind executive would talk to me each time and say, no, no, no. Finally, one day she said to me, don't you have anything about diners? And I said, sure, I'm developing this show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. And she said, that sounds interesting. Get us a write-up. I think this was like a late Thursday or Friday afternoon. They had a meeting on Tuesday. She wanted a write-up on Monday. I put down the phone, and this was great with one exception. I was not developing a show called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. I had just pulled the name out of thin air or out of a bodily part, if you want to go in that direction. And I spent the weekend making research phone calls, wrote up a show on Monday, delivered it. And not that long thereafter, they picked up a 1-hour special called Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives.
So this is, obviously it's all accidental, but how do you, well, first I want to ask how difficult is it to pitch, you know, reality shows, but food of all things, because that wasn't even
the Food Network existed. There was a venue. It was pretty much the only outlet. Travel Channel at the time was doing some food, but the pitching game, if you're not represented by an agent, to a great extent, it's a matter of luck and entree. I happened to stumble into doing some work for them, which gave me a phone number and an email address of an executive, which made it possible for me to pitch. It's probably harder these days as cable has become more interesting to the big players in television. And now a boutique, or, well, what a boutique is one guy with an answering machine and some aspiration, or woman. It's a lot harder for boutiques to get in there, because if you're a commissioning executive and you have a pitch from Joe Schlabotnik, and you also have a pitch from Fremantle, one of the largest production entities in the world, it's a lot safer to go with Fremantle, because if it fails, hey, it was Fremantle. If you go with Joe Schlabotnik and it fails, then you were clearly a moron for going with some untested entity. So it is not easy. I think the real takeaway, though, from my story is that you have to have the realistic self-confidence to stretch. My own rule in television has always been, if they ask you to do something, say, of course, and then if you don't know how, figure out how. I remember early in my international career with NBC, we were all in Cairo, a bunch of international folks, for some big story. I don't know what the big story was, but it was big enough that a big deal, big shot executive from the New York office was there overseeing things, stomping around the rather tiny Cairo office. And at one point he walks up to me, he says, "Page." I go, "Yes." He says, "Go to Khartoum." I say, "Absolutely, sir." Then I turned to the local driver after the big shots left the room, and I said, "Where's Khartoum?" He said, "It's in the Sudan." I said, "Where's the Sudan?" He said, "One country south." So, if you're going to make a claim, you're going to have to put up. But I've always been one who says you ought to go for it.
So what about the creative? How much input did you have on the creative process? And then my next question would be finding all of these diners.
Well, two completely different issues. Input on the creative process was virtually total. The network would look at what you want to do and say yes or no, or offer suggestions. But during the time I did the show, for the most part, they respected good work and were glad to get it. As for finding the restaurants, that got easier over time, because once people knew who we were, they were more eager to play, especially as they had seen that being on the show could do wonders for a restaurant's business. The first year was tough, and I did the first 11 seasons of the show.
Right.
During the time I was there, the process was the same. I had a staff of researchers whose job it was to find places that met our qualifications, and our bar was very high in whatever cities we had chosen to go to. Now, one of the things about the creative on a show like Diners is that in the final analysis, anything creative that involves a moving image is defined by the available budget. Okay. You can't shoot more than you can afford to shoot. And as a result, I worked out a schedule, a plan whereby wherever we went to shoot, and we shot for 4 or 5 days at a stretch, multiple locations, needed to be close to some definably other place, so that out of that trip, I could get a place in Iowa, a place in Minnesota, another place that was in rural Iowa if one of them was in Des Moines, so that as I spread them out over various shows, I was able to maintain geographical diversity. So that was my decision, at which point the researchers would get to work contacting everybody they could find in those locations that legitimately knew about food. The folks who wrote for the local paper, especially the folks who wrote for the Alt Weekly, that often had more of an interest on digging deep into food. If the city had a magazine, if the state had a magazine, obviously we checked online reporting and reviews, although reviews are certainly a very shaky thing to base anything on. Then I would select the places that at first blush looked interesting. And the researchers would start calling these places and talking to the people who owned and cooked in them. And our requirements were that this real food made for real from scratch by people who gave a damn and who also were engaging television characters. Television is all about spending time with people you want to spend time with. Everything else is icing or bells and whistles, which meant that the owners of these places or the chefs had to have engaging personalities. Now, on occasion, about 5% of the time, after going through the entire process, the crew would walk into a place, Guy would call me back and say, it doesn't make it. And we'd cancel it, and I'd eat the money. The network was shocked by that. But it was essential to me that we tell the truth, unlike much of reality TV, and that everything we said be backed up by facts. And, you know, we would end up getting a fair amount of recommendations from civilians who would tell me, you got to go to this. It's my favorite restaurant. They make the best chili on earth. And then when you start to look into that restaurant, you would find out that the chili was canned and delivered by Cisco or US Food. People's views of great food are often skewed by the circumstances in which the food is consumed. And by the way, I'm sure that a can of Cisco chili is just fine. I live on a little tourist island in South Jersey. There's a place here that is famed for their pancakes. I was eager to put them on television, so I asked a few questions, and their pancake mix comes out of a box. Not at all. That if you're making pancakes, then you're going to make them. They're not going to come out of a box. I mean, we did a place. Please let me remember where it was. In St. Paul, Minnesota, one of the oldest diners on earth, and they make their pancake mix from scratch in the basement. That's the kind of place I wanted to go.
Right. How did you meet Guy? How did
they gave him to me?
Okay, I want to know how that came
and
about.
I was terrified. They said they wanted to do a special, and I immediately said, well, let me suggest the host. And they said, no, we have your host. And let me backstory this a little bit. Guy had won the second annual Food Network Star Contest at a time when they truly believed and hoped that the contest was going to create their next generation of stars. It hasn't turned out that way. In fact, I think so far, Guy is probably the only real success story. But Guy had won the competition. They were very high on him, and they were looking to find something for him in prime time. Pardon me, it's allergy season here at the Jersey Shore, and I don't want to do what I did in an interview the other day on a TV station, which is sneeze. Which there's no way to recover from. Anyway, you just look stupid. So they wanted to do something with Guy. They had they told two big deal production companies, not Joe Schlabotniks, to come back with proposals for primetime programming. And in the interim, they figured, it couldn't hurt to keep his face in front of their viewers. So they picked up my special. Now, the problem they had is my special did well, and they hated the proposals they got from the big deal production companies. So now they're in this odd situation of deciding whether to gamble on an unknown entity, me, i.e. Joe Schlabotnik. But they had to do something. They wanted Guy on TV. So they picked up a short first season, which I can get back to in a minute. But in terms of how did I get Guy, I started proposing hosts, and they said, no, we want you to look this guy up, Guy Fieri, or as they mispronounced it at the time, Fieri. That became a point of contention with them, that they weren't pronouncing his name properly, and I don't blame them. Anyway, so I went online and I Googled Guy Fieri, and it came up with a guy with spiky hair, wearing his sunglasses backwards, short pants and flip-flops. And I thought to myself, I'm screwed. And then I hit play. And I will tell you that while Guy had a tremendous amount to learn, he was green. He's also the single most naturally talented television performer I've ever worked with in 50 years. So that was a good thing, as Bill Murray said in Caddyshack. So I had that going for me.
So how did you when it came to, I understand how you guys chose they did the research to choose which diners. How do you even know the food was good? And how did you prep prior? Because I would assume that you just didn't go right and say, hey, we're filming, and not, I mean, what if the food sucked? Did you choose
Well,
something?
if the food sucked, we would walk out. And I said that happened 5% of the time. We basically made our selections based on what people told us. And then by working with the chef on the phone we went through every step of every dish, every ingredient, because understand something, when you put it together on television, it looks seamless. And many reality shows shoot with multiple cameras to try to get it all in real time. But they don't shoot movies that way, because each shot you set up from a different angle requires different lighting and requires you to have a cameraman in a position that would likely be seen by another camera if you're shooting multiple cameras. So I chose to shoot single camera, which means we made each dish 4 or 5 times. One time you make the dish entirely on close-ups with the camera on a tripod. One time you make the dish with the camera on a wide shot. You see both people and the food. One time you make the dish with the camera on Guy. One time you make the dish with the camera on the chef. And then you put it all together. Now, it's complicated in the field because you then may have to replicate certain moments where someone said something. But you do the wide pass first. That's your basis of what the conversation really is. And then you go and fill in the holes. As to the quality of the food, we were very good at identifying places where the food was legitimately good, based to a great extent on conversations with the chef. And as I said, 5% of the time we walked in and walked out.
Okay, then I wanted to talk about the people, the patrons. And the people and the patrons in the restaurants. So usually, you see there's those pieces of the show where they go and they talk to people at the table. Now, would they have to be, I would assume, known in advance, like, okay, look, we're closing the restaurant for this.
Not at first. I insisted at first on doing this in an open restaurant and talking to real patrons. My understanding is that over the years, remember, I only did the first 11 seasons. Structure changed and they closed the restaurant, and apparently, because I don't know, have the owners invite people to be guests. I preferred, and this is no criticism on how anyone else has chosen to do anything, I just thought it was better to be in the middle of a real situation and to talk to real people. So we did. I mean, and it's funny who you find as real people. In one situation, Rosie O'Donnell was there. This is when America still liked her. And she talked to us. Yeah. In another situation in New Mexico, Gene Hackman came in as a patron. He lives in New Mexico. And he talked to us. So serendipity. I had a mentor in the business who once said to me, only with discipline can come creativity. In other words, if you have the thing structured very carefully so that you're going to get everything you need to a certain level, that leaves you the room to punt when another opportunity comes up. It's when I was a producer overseas, you're probably too young to remember, but there was there was a revolution in Romania in '89, which I was in charge of the NBC people covering it. And we had the benefit of the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, had one excellent correspondent there. And we had a reciprocal agreement with the CBC. So what I said to this correspondent, Sheila McVicker, who later went on to a number of American networks and is a phenomenal correspondent, what I said to her was, we will keep the sausage machine running. I will give you everything from basic coverage to tell the basic story that I get with my rather large NBC team. You go out and concentrate only on finding something really special. So since I had the discipline of the story being covered, I also had the freedom of her going out to find something remarkable, which she did every day. And it was wonderful.
So do you think that having, for Dinos and Drives became so enormously popular, and still is, that it really opened the door for a lot of these other food shows that we see? Because we really didn't see that much before.
There were some. I mean, the concept of going to restaurants in 3 acts was not unknown. It was kind of a standard. It was a question of how, if I can sound egotistical for a minute, how to elevate that format into something that was really embracing of its audience. As I said, good television is voyeurism. And I think I did a pretty good job of using the available tools to bring people into a sensory experience where the main sense is unavailable to them. The difficult part of food television is that you can neither taste nor smell the food. So you have to make it as appealing as possible, make the process of making it as interesting as possible. And then you have to, and not enough shows do this, you have to play to the one sense that in some respects is the most important one in film or television that people don't think of, which is sound. If I put 3 jarringly disparate shots next to each other, but the sound behind them, whether it's a car driving by or whatever, if that sound is contiguous, then your mind accepts that these 3 things happened at once. And the thing I paid extra attention to in diners was, I don't know if you're familiar with the term sweetening. It's what you do to a soundtrack after all the pictures are together. And each of the clangs of a spoon or the sizzle of a piece of meat as it hit the grill or the sound of swirling a soup, almost all of that was added through sound effects in post-production. And then the track was carefully mixed together. Because most kitchens are terrible sound environments. There's usually a hood sucking air out of the space in front of you. And the ability to get real sound is very, very difficult. Certainly, it's hard to distinguish individual sounds. And yet, if I put a burger on a grill and you don't hear it, okay, it's a hockey puck on a grill. If, as I drop that burger onto the grill, you hear the sizzling begin and the fats start to rend, and you hear the metal spatula as it slides back out, now you're involved in that sequence. We typically spent 23 hours audio sweetening each episode, each half-hour episode.
Oh my gosh. Wait, just for the for a half-hour episode, it's like a day of work.
Yeah. On the clock, by the way. That's a process you outsource. It ain't cheap.
So can we talk a little about Beer Geeks?
Certainly.
So, how did that come to fruition? I mean, that's interesting. I like, just the name.
It's a good name.
Yeah, it's a good name.
It's a good name. It came into fruition because a network wanted a beer show and then turned it down. Discovery was looking to do something about beer because craft beer had become cool. And I don't know how I found out about it. I was probably pitching them something. And so I went out and wrote up a proposal, and they liked it. So they asked me to do a small pilot, not a full show, but enough to show what was possible. And they picked the talent. They had me test 2 different guys. One of them dropped out at the last minute, and there's a backstory to that. So in a rush on the telephone with their talent booker, we looked at some people, and I said, I really like this guy. You think we could get him here tomorrow? And in fact, we were able to get him there tomorrow. That's Michael Ferguson, known in the industry as Mufasa, who is one of the most charismatic and knowledgeable master brewers in the business. So he flew to Boston because we were shooting our pilot at the Cambridge Brewing Company, as did another fellow who's also very well known in the industry. And in successive days, I basically shot the same thing with each of them. I cut 2 demo reels, even though, pardon me, I'm going to clear my throat. At least I didn't sneeze. I shot 2 demo reels, even though it was clear to me from the first instant that the host was going to be Michael Ferguson. Mm-hmm. I talked to the network about it. They were extremely interested. And in the final analysis, they made, in my view, the mistake that is so often made in the reality world, which is instead of going for this show, which took a real amusing but serious look, treated beer with respect, they went with a gimmicky show where another brewer traveled places to try to do all sorts of brews under pressure, and they lost the necessary piece on the train trip, and that didn't make it. So now I'm sitting here with a really good idea I've proposed, a great host, and a pitch reel, and I can't sell a damn show. So I went for it. As I talked about earlier, if you don't know how to do something, figure out how to do it. And I decided to finance the show myself and syndicate it.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
So that's what we did. Halfway through its run in syndication, we were approached by, I don't know, somehow we ended up talking to Aura.tv, one of the early streaming services, which had been created with funding from the Mexican billionaire Carlos Slim as the new home of Slim's friend Larry King after King got booted from CNN. So they basically built a network to give Larry a home, and then they picked up our show to be on it. In all, we did, I don't know, 26 or 27 episodes. I'm very proud of it. Craft beer gets a bad name as being one of those snooty foodophile things. In fact, it's just a variety of good beers. Some of them you may like, some of them you may not, made in a fashion that is often more artisanal than Bud Light. Now, having said that, let me also point something out. Some of the greatest brewers in the world work for Budweiser. If you look at the craft beer industry, many of the brewers in the craft beer industry came from Budweiser because the skill, talent, and scientific knowledge it takes to produce identical cans of beer at multiple locations throughout the United States. You can't tell when you open a Bud whether it came from New Jersey or St. Louis. That takes real skill. They have truly talented brewers who are producing exactly the beer they want to produce. It isn't crappy beer. It is an American lager done exactly the way they want to make it. So having gotten that out of the way, we ended up traveling around to a bunch of remarkable breweries. I didn't know a whole lot about what I liked. I knew I had worked in Czechoslovakia a lot back when that was still a country, and that I enjoyed their Pilsners. We even did a story at the Budweiser Bouillabaisse brewery in what was then Czechoslovakia, because they were engaged in a legal battle in the States to try to get the rights to sell their beer under the Budweiser name, which they had sold to the Bush family in like the 1800s. They would eventually lose that case. But what was funny to us, not to them, is when we started shooting, I had my correspondent pull a 6-pack of Bud out of a paper bag, drop it on the desk in front of the white-coated beer scientist, and say, "This Bud's for you." Obviously, the fellow from Czechoslovakia didn't get it, but we thought we were being hilarious. And I used to look forward to, in the old days when there was still the Iron Curtain, to going to Prague and checking into the Intercontinental Hotel and opening the little mini bar to see if it was going to be Pilsner or Kvel or Budweiser Bouillabaisse, and they're both of which are great beers. And one of the things we did in Beer Geeks was try to take beer has almost a wine level of, maybe more, of complication and misunderstanding associated with it. Beer is one of the oldest substances on earth. Allegedly, at one time, people drank it because the water was no good. That's apocryphal, and there's good reason to believe it wasn't true, but I love to say it. Anyway, I learned a tremendous amount about beer and about its place in the food system, and the fact that beer is as pairable, should be paired with specific foods in the same way wine is.
Right.
For example,
Right.
in the broad spectrum of available product, beer is much more pairable with cheese than wine.
I wouldn't think that.
No, it's absolutely true.
Well, maybe it's a kind of beer.
Pardon me?
Maybe it's
you pick your beer based on what the cheese is.
Right.
It's not this, well, it's cheese, it must be white wine. You're
Right.
trying to there's two ways to go when you pair. You can either complement a flavor or you can contrast a flavor. And it depends on what your taste is at the time. For example, I love oysters with a stout. That's a contrast. Oysters can also be very good with a Pilsner, for example, which is a crisper taste, which is more complementary to the taste of the oysters. And I live on an island where we have really remarkable oysters. So there you go.
I'm sure there had to be, because you're dealing with the brand of these beer companies and these owners, how much, I'm sure there had to be some do's and don'ts where there was a lot of legal stuff in place. There was nothing that you had to adhere to, what you couldn't do, couldn't say because of their brand.
I wouldn't do it if they gave us a problem. See, one of the things I learned early on was only go places you're wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Early attempts to try to convince people that the shoot would go okay despite their significant doubts or concerns, all you end up with is a crappy shoot. I remember talking to some folks out in Portland who owned an excellent restaurant we wanted to do on diners. They actually specialized in biscuits. And they were really fighting my people on what we wanted to do and how we wanted to do it. And when my folks reported back to me, in their presence, I called up the owner and I said, look, no harm, no foul. We have learned that the only way for us to make the TV show we want to make is if you give us the freedom to do what we want to do. So let's just not do this. And all of a sudden he was, no, we want to do this. We want. Okay, but I didn't do it as a power play. I did it because I don't like shooting around. Look, I was an investigative reporter for many years. I've had guns pulled on me. I don't want to be someplace you don't want me anymore. Okay.
Oh gosh, that's almost like, hardball, I guess you'd say, in a nice way.
Yeah, but it's just pragmatic. It's like if the girl doesn't want to go out with you, don't badger her until you get a mercy date. It's not going to be fun.
Right. Has anyone ever come to you? Or are you open to the door? People say, I have a show. I have an idea and a concept, and that you've taken that into consideration, or that they want guidance.
Yeah, everyone has a show. I have looked at 8,400,012 shows. I have pitched some of them. They have not been bought. It's harder than hell to get a show on TV. It's also hard. Everyone has a kitchen, so everyone thinks they can cook. Everyone has a television, so everyone thinks they can make a TV show. It ain't that simple.
It seems nowadays from, well, I'm in my 50s, so reality TV is...
You're a young child.
So,
I have shoes that are in their 50s.
So to me, it's reality. It's more reality TV has come to. It's not really the entertainment. It's the drama.
Well, you got to define your terms. Most reality TV, by definition, isn't real. Most reality TV. I mean, I guess technically Diners was/is reality television, but I always thought of it more as entertaining documentary television. There's a difference.
Yeah.
The reality shows like The Real Housewives of Klingenhofer Bay or whatever. That's all. None of it's true.
It just seems that there's so much of that coming out then.
Well, people like to watch that. Okay. I mean, people know that they shouldn't eat deep fried butter at the state fair, but they do.
Right.
We could get into a lengthy theological, ethical, moral debate about what reality television has done to America. And for the most part, I don't think it's a good thing at all. But
I agree.
We have a free market system. If somebody, let's understand why television in its traditional form exists. Streaming is changing that. Television used to be, and on the broadcast networks and cable networks still is, a way to aggregate consumers to watch commercials. The content mattered a lot to me, but in the final analysis, in the ecosystem of mass media, the only function I served was to bring a certain number of eyeballs to the screen. In fact, the only ratings that we cared about were 18 to 54. The ratings that you were judged on at the network were the most saleable demographic. There were times I had no idea what our household numbers were that week, but I sure as hell knew what our 18 to 54s were. Because that's what TV in its old incarnation and still today on cable and broadcast, that's what it is. It's an eyeball delivery system.
Do you have anything that you're working on that we might be looking forward to coming up that you're
unfortunately for TV viewers, I'm now an author. I have moved on from television into my next career. I'm writing books.
Food America.
Yeah, Food Americana, which is out now and available for purchase. A natural extension of my interests in food, which then turned into diners and which I've taken to a next level in my book. But I'm one of those folks, I've had a number of careers. You're defined frequently by your last job. So I've been a government reporter, I've been an investigative reporter, I've been a foreign reporter, I've been a show producer, I've been whatever I did yesterday, and now I'm a food journalist. And most TV producers, those who write well write invisibly. The writing in television is simply supposed to guide you from moment to moment seamlessly. That is different than telling a story entirely through words. And you'll find that most television producers all think they have a book inside them somewhere. Luckily, my first book has been successful. It's the story of how America built a cuisine out of the cuisines of other cultures and countries. But it's not a history. It's about where we eat today and what we like and why we like it and what it is, why sushi has, to a great extent, replaced hamburgers as the go-to lunch of kids in high school. It's, I think, quite interesting. I'm very proud of it, and it's doing well.
Actually, that's a really, really great concept. I love food, but I feel that you don't get a lot of traditional. You have to know where to go to get a lot of real traditional food if you want food from like other continents. Like you can go to these Chinese places, but it's not real Chinese food.
No, don't say that. It is real Chinese American cuisine.
American. Okay,
it may not be the food you eat in China, although understand something, even that is changing. Yeah. One of the most popular dishes among young people in China is scrambled eggs and tomatoes. Now, Chinese food as traditionally eaten in China, and there are many, many kinds of Chinese food because it's a huge country with many regional cuisines, but a variety of the kinds of foods as actually eaten in China is increasingly available in the United States because as the Chinese economy got stronger, it became easier for young Chinese citizens to immigrate, even temporarily, to go to school in the United States
Mhm.
or to work in the United States. And you now have enough of a native Chinese population living in America that for the first time in history, Chinese restaurants can thrive aiming their food at Chinese, not non-Chinese Americans.
Right.
In my book, I visit a huge food hall pre-pandemic in Flushing, Queens, which is in New York City, was a Jewish neighborhood when I was born there, is now a Chinese neighborhood. And I was taken by a couple of Chinese grad students to this huge food hall with stand after stand after stand of the food they were used to eating back home. And some of it is relatively familiar, dumplings, hand-pulled noodles, that sort of thing. And
Right.
some of it is on first sight or first description, things that many Americans would turn their noses up at, such as artery, tripe, duck blood, tendon, because in reality, we're one of the few cultures that doesn't eat all of the animal.
Yeah.
And so in a demeaning way, Americans may look down on that and say, yuck, it's delicious. I ate like a king at various stalls in that facility.
Right.
Now, that sort of food is expanding across the United States. And also, some of it is being integrated and Americanized into menus aimed at Americans. There's a kind of cooking called Chinese 2.0, which is modifying Chinese food from our modification of it in the first place,
Right.
and returning to flavors, textures, and ingredients, either as used in China or an homage to the food as used in China. I was lucky enough with my wife to dine at 8 Tables in San Francisco as a guest of the chef, because boy, that place is expensive. It's about $1,000 for 2. And he serves a massive tasting menu of dishes inspired by the dishes he grew up with in China, embodying the textures and the flavors, though none of them exist in China.
Right.
The chef, George Chen, is pushing the envelope for both countries.
Do you find you have to do a lot of continual research, and because there's always some new concept or some idea or some new way?
Well, as my good friend Alvaro Trenchy, the greatest videotape editor on earth, said to me once, David, you're never done. You just run out of time. At some point, you have to lock the book. One of the problems I had with this book was that I had to monitor the unfortunate impact of COVID on the restaurant industry and be ready to react to any changes reflected. Now, the good news is the things in my book are all in some way American comfort food, which we actually fell back on during these difficult times. But there were a couple of restaurants that were in the book at one point that had to be taken out because, unfortunately, COVID shut them down. They ain't coming back.
So I'm assuming you have another book you're working on.
Oh, yes. And I can't tell you about it because I'd have to kill you, but it's really good. The only thing I can tell you is that among its entries will be hot dogs, which I intentionally left out of this book because you don't cook them, you just dress them. And you don't make them, you just, hamburgers you make, if you're good, from scratch. Almost no one is making their own hot dogs.
Yeah, what is in a hot dog?
Well, first of all, it's not the garbage that supposedly was in hot dogs many years ago. It's beef or pork or veal or chicken, depends on the hot dog. I think the reality is in some hot dogs, you get more of what ABC got sued years ago for calling pink slime, when in fact it's called lean beef something, which is scraps of meat taken from as close to the bone as is possible. But a good hot dog's a good hot dog. There's nothing wrong with a damn fine hot dog. And there's a great story, frankly, in the family behind Nathan's, where I'm currently reading The two different grandsons of Nathan put out competing books telling different self-centered stories about whether Nathan was or was not a nice guy. So I haven't read them. I've just got them. So I'll have to wade through that and figure out what the real story was.
Yeah, Nathan's is great. As a matter of fact, I think like they have a nice good one here. Well, I know our time is running low. I really enjoy you being on the show. I mean,
I enjoy being here. Thank you.
Give quite a bit of insight and makes I'm sure everybody hungry. And of course, I didn't know about the book Food Americana. So and I'm assuming it tells a little about your journey as well into the show. So it's a good read.
It's a great read, but it's about food. It's not about me. The only story, well, I include my visits to various places, my time spent at pizza school in San Francisco, where it turned out I was the worst student in the class. But the most personal story I tell is about how my grandmother, an immigrant, Jewish immigrant from Poland, used to make me something she called Jewish spaghetti, which was spaghetti, I presume she boiled it, in a pan with onions and ketchup. And in that picture is a metaphor for our entire cuisine. Here's a woman who escaped the Nazis, came to America, and wanting to assimilate and be American, she cooked for me what she thought of as an American dish, spaghetti, which was originally Italian, and gave it her own twist. And our entire cuisine is built on the cuisines of other places with our own twist.
Right. Before we do exit, actually, someone had a question for you. I don't know if you can do that. I can read it to you.
Has the restaurant ever been rescued financially? Yes. One of the great things I found out relatively early on was that we saved a number of restaurants from bankruptcy. My daughter used to compete, she's an equestrian, at the horse park in Lexington, Kentucky, where a barbecue restaurant was that had been featured on the show, a great barbecue restaurant. And we went there once, and I thought they were going to adopt me. The owners, and it gets embarrassing because they wouldn't let us pay, but the owners explained to us that they were like days or weeks away from shutting down when diners came out. And from that point forward, their business went through the roof. We did that for a number of businesses, and it made me very happy.
Oh, that's impressive. So, okay. So for everybody who has been watching or listening, wherever you're listening from, I'm sure you are enjoying this interview and you're probably hungry. So you'll want to make sure you check out David's book,
Food Americana. You can get it on Amazon, Walmart, Target, Barnes & Noble, your local independent bookstore. Food Americana. I'm putting a daughter through grad school. Buy a couple copies.
Okay, guys, and then we are going to end the show. And until our next show, make sure that you subscribe to the YouTube channel or go to the website, entrepreneurlifeshow.com, where we have the best guests, the best interviews. You can connect with all of them. Watch on the replay, listen on the replay. And until next time, I will see you. I'm Rose, your host of the Entrepreneur Life Show. And again, thank you to David Page for bringing real great food show and to television.
Well, Rose, thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
And until next time, have a wonderful week, everybody. We are out of here.